Good evening, everybody. My name's Lee Marsden. I'm the head of Politics, Philosophy, Language and Communication Studies at the school, and welcome to this, the second in our series of kindness in the, being kind in a cruel world. And this particular evening is going to be dedicated to kindness in the community. Quite an intimate discussion with a very select crowd of people, all educated and informed, and I'm sure eager to participate. I'm particularly excited tonight with the panel that we've got, and the idea is it's going to be a round table discussion, albeit without a round table, but a diverse sort of mix of speakers for you tonight. So if I just introduce them briefly and then ask them to talk for probably about 20 minutes each on their particular areas of expertise. We'll then open that up to discussions and questions, comments, and hopefully all get a lot out of the evening. There will be some wine, orange juice in the foyer afterwards, so please stay and have a further chat with the speakers. That would be excellent. So if I could perhaps start by introducing Sandra Rutherford, who's come over from Belfast and has been involved with the Clonard Fitzroy Fellowship for a number of years. Were you actually one of the inaugural members of it?
Yes,
An inaugural member of it. Okay. I know Sandra and her husband James from the time when I was researching on the role of the church in the peace process quite a few years ago now. And I came across Sandra and James, and they personified kindness, and actually reaching out to me and being able to introduce me to lots of different people, welcome me into their home, and we've kept in touch ever since, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about what's going on in Belfast and Northern Ireland at the moment. Our second speaker will be on my far right, Hannah Rich, who's from the Theos think tank, which is a faith-based think tank in London. She's working on a 3-year project at the moment called the Grace Project, which is growth, relationship and action in the Church of England. And she's going to talk a little bit about that, I think, and about social action generally in the work of churches in social action. Are you still Vice Chair of Christians on the Left as well? There we go. So, as I say, a diverse mix of people, speakers tonight. And then our final speaker will be immediately on my right, Tom Gaskin from The Missing Kind, and more specifically a director of Pop-Up Enterprises. So very interested in social enterprise and encouraging and releasing other people in that area as well. Really interesting panel. I look forward to hearing what they have to say, but what you have to contribute as well in this. Sandra, I wonder if you'd like to...
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Lee, for the invite, and it's great to be here. The first time we met Lee was just after he'd written his book, For God's Sake, The American Right in US Foreign Policy. I think that's the right title. And we read it, and after reading it, it made me realise that so much of what he was talking about resonated in Northern Ireland, because a lot of our influence comes from the American churches, for good or not. So. And the first two people I met this evening have a Northern Irish connection, so I feel very at home, which is great. In Northern Ireland, the legacy of the past may be that people think of it as a very cruel place, and it was for a long time. Our society is still divided into Catholic and Protestant areas, separate schools. Even newspapers would reflect either nationalist or unionist viewpoints. This evening, I want to tell you of some of the individuals who've stepped out of their traditions, firstly in the churches, then in community, and finally in politics. And in between, I'll mention some of the community groups which have shown great kindness. Two people have shown enormous courage, both during the Troubles and also during our often tense post-conflict transition. One is the Reverend Ken Newell, longtime minister of Fitzroy Presbyterian Church, and Father Jerry Reynolds of Clonard Monastery. Ken was quite sectarian in his youth. He was a member of the Orange Order. He used to paint slogans like "Kick the Pope" on gable walls. He then spent time in Indonesia, and when he came back to Belfast, he was asked to speak on Thought for the Day, and he chose the text, "Blessed are the peacemakers." This was during the 1981 hunger strikes. Father McCarthy from Clonard Monastery heard him, invited him up, and they started a dialogue, which became a joint Bible study, and then changed into what we call now the Clonard Fitzroy Fellowship. And yes, I was a founder member. I had just come back from working in Nigeria, teaching maths for 2 years with voluntary service overseas. And I'd been changed really by the people I'd met there, especially maybe the Irish nuns who'd given a life of service in hospitals and schools. So when I came back to Northern Ireland, I wanted to find a church that would be reaching out to people. Father Jerry Reynolds in 1983 from Limerick, he was hoping to go abroad as a missionary priest, and he was sent instead to the mission fields of Belfast and Clonard Monastery. So he was very gentle and prayerful. His kindness and humility encouraged the growing trust and friendships between our two congregations. Where he lived was quite a deprived area, but with a great sense of Irishness. Father Jerry totally accepted people, and he was always available to listen. One person, Terry, had been an alcoholic and was estranged from his family, and one evening, Jerry listened to a very, very lengthy account of his extremely turbulent life, and at the end he replied with the kindest words possible, "What a wonderful story." Terry was so moved by Jerry's acceptance that he started coming with Jerry to our meetings and eventually accompanied him to retreats, and he himself was soon leading them. Ken said that Father Jerry taught me to act from a calm centre in a busy life and to look for the best in others. Funerals here are a big part of life, and during the Troubles, over 3,000 people died. Father Jerry and Ken started attending funerals because they wanted to pray with the families and show solidarity to demonstrate a better way forward together. The grief was the same in both communities. Ken and Jerry's caring often had a lasting impact. Father Alec Reid, another Redemptorist, had been encouraging dialogue between Jerry Adams from Sinn Féin and John Hume, an SDLP leader in Derry. In fact, he had a letter in his pocket from Jerry to John that horrific day when the two corporals were murdered, and Father Alec had tried to save their lives by covering over them. And that evening he still had to deliver the letter up to Derry. Terrible week that we had. Father Jerry and Father Alec persuaded Ken and some friends to meet with Jerry Adams and other Sinn Féin representatives. They just started off by sharing their stories about their families and where they went on holidays. And trust again grew and was built between them. Ken and Jerry met with Republican and Loyalist paramilitary groups. It was very dangerous for both of them, and on some occasions Ken's family didn't know A, where they were going, and B, whether they would even come back again. Their courage helped others to engage with these paramilitary groups, and all of this helped to contribute to the ceasefire in 1994. In 1999, the Clonard Fitzroy Group was awarded the International Pax Christi Peace Prize, which was surprising really, as we are such a small group, always been small, But I think we've also supported other interchurch groups on a similar journey. We've had great times of sorrow and joy, organising ceilidhs, musical events, ending in maybe singing Fields of Athen Rye, which is more known for rugby. We invited all the political groups, and each of them says it has helped them because they have had a different audience from what they're used to, and it helps them look at things in a different way. Journalist Brian Rowan, who wrote on a book, Unfinished Peace, came to speak with us, and we had Sinn Féin people in our church who'd never been in a Protestant church before, and they happened to be sitting behind a loyalist group who had come over, and the chat and coffee afterwards was amazing. All of those people have been back at events since then. We also invited people of different faiths and visited the mosque and the synagogue. As a result of this, one of our members, Ed, is now chair of the Northern Ireland Interfaith Forum. And he helped organise a meeting where the 7 different faith groups came together, and we had a meeting on prayer, and each one talked about their own tradition of prayer and then prayed in their tradition. It was a very moving, very long event, but it demonstrated the kindness of listening to and respecting others. I benefited from Father Jerry's concern and caring when I had cancer, which had spread, and I was overwhelmed by the caring of the group. And at the first chemo session, I remembered that Clonard were having a mass for me at that very moment, and all my friends were assembled there, and it gave a great sense of peace. Jerry passed away 2 years ago. Ken is still forging a new path to peace. He said recently, "In Northern Ireland, where hope is hard to hold on to, I have glimpsed a promised land where estrangement and conflict finally give way to peace and reconciliation. We need to capture the spirit of generosity at the time of the agreement. To live inclusively, that is the challenge." You're probably aware of the recent polarisation of our main political parties, DUP and Sinn Féin, that they couldn't come to agreement on an Irish Language Act. Andrew Marr's review of How Democracies Die says, rival parties should accept each other as legitimate rivals and exercise restraint and civility. If you use the democratic process to enforce the democratic system to enforce your advantage, you soon wreck it. And further on, we are getting too angry and too intolerant for our democratic health. He's writing about Britain, but it also resonates about Northern Ireland, especially our biggest parties. There's a lack of kindness in political discourse, and we sometimes struggle to find examples of the same kind of courage to be kind that we saw in Ken and Jerry. What happened in the past still casts a long shadow. For some who've lost loved ones, the past is still the present. We need to find a way of acknowledging it to help heal the wounds which set us on a forward path. And I'm glad just in the last week that reconciliation has come to the forefront of one of the ways in this process. One of the people helping with this is Padraig O'Tuma, a poet and theologian from Cork, and he leads our main reconciliation centre, Corrymeela. I first met him at his tiny house where he had invited as many people as could fit in for poetry and soup. He and his partner Paul now lead 10 by 9 events where 9 people tell a true story of up to 10 minutes on a topic such as love or sorry. About 150 turn up for these totally free events in the Black Box in Belfast. The stories can be very moving, very funny. Padraig believes in community and kindness. He says, It is in the shelter of each other that the people live. And he often says it in Irish, which I can't do. He recently started 10 by 9 in prison, where the prisoners initially told stories about their own lives, and now they and the prison guards tell true stories about their lives together, which is amazing and very humanizing. The storytelling builds empathy and community. And at the moment there are 10 by 9s in Melbourne, in Nashville, all over the UK, all inspired by Padraig. Sometimes what is most personal is also most universal. He was inspired by Michael McRae, an American who's lived in Belfast and has written about Palestine and the prisoners whom he visited on death row in the southern United States. Michael says, "Part of the truth of our world is that it is broken and breaking more every day. But that is only part of the truth. Our world is also a place of beauty, love, and unfathomable generosity. There is kindness, there is laughter, there is healing. I have come to the conclusion that there are only two movements in the world. One is kindness, and the other is cruelty." He continues, "I do believe that a kinder world is on the way. I believe it because I must. I believe it because believing it makes it more likely. And I wait for it, with eyes open and feet moving." In our post-conflict context, it's not only how we handle the legacy of the past that requires kindness. We must also address the sort of social challenges that are common in other Western societies, such as poverty, homelessness, welcoming immigrants and refugees. People in Northern Ireland are more likely to donate to charities than in any other part of the UK. So we have a vast voluntary and charity network. We have 4 food banks covering all the corners of Belfast. None of these could operate without help from churches. And yet it is this cooperation between civil society and the church which probably benefits and challenges the churches the most. A similar organisation, Storehouse, started 8 years ago in a cupboard of a city church. It has grown to now an inner city warehouse and a large office where people are given an appointment and they sit down in a very good way and their needs are addressed. There's also a clothing boutique where they can try on clothes before they're given them, and it's just like a normal shopping experience. Over 120 parcels of tinned and dried food is given out each week. Recently, more Syrian refugees have been arriving, as they probably are here, and every few weeks about 55 people arrive from camps in Turkey. They are welcomed by volunteers from the Red Cross. We do have racist attacks, though thankfully not many. Homeless charities in Belfast say that there are very few actual homeless people. There's a group called the Welcome Organisation who drive round checking on people in doorways, and we would just phone them now and maybe buy the person a sandwich or coffee. Our church helps with the South Belfast Food Bank. It has a global kitchen where people from different countries are encouraged to share their cooking skills, which is great for everyone. It provides social enterprises to help people into jobs in an area of huge long-term unemployment. The centre's partly inspired by Henrietta Moore, a feminist anthropologist from Oxford, who says, "Prosperity in our cities can no longer be thought of in economic terms. It's about flourishing and well-being, the health of a society, social relationships, and having educated and satisfied citizens who have a choice and freedom." I think we could look at Brexit in a similar way, that we should value our relationships with Europe and not just think in economic terms. The health of a society is also measured in how we look after our weakest. The L'Arche community models a society where everyone is valued and those with intellectual or physical disability live alongside volunteers in homes. 2 of our sons spent time in L'Arche and were totally changed by it. The Belfast L'Arche recently partnered with jobless people in a catering enterprise called Root Soup. They also share in the work of growing vegetables in 2 allotments. Lila Watson, the Australian artist and activist, says, "If you've come to help me, then you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together." L'Arche models this well, and their kindness in our community is quite amazing. They bring people together without status or labels. Another example of caring in our community is the SOS bus, started by Joe Hyland, whose son was badly beaten up one evening he went out. I gather you have that in Norwich. It provides an amazing good-natured service, mostly to young people who find themselves in difficulty after a night out. The compassion shown is a real kindness to the people who've maybe lost phones or maybe are too incapacitated to help themselves. In spite of all how it seems on the news, we have politicians here with goodwill towards all the community. We have politicians inspired by Nelson Mandela, who demonstrated political kindness designed to heal instead of divide, and who forgave his oppressors, then worked with them. And President Obama, who said that kindness was his driving motivation. Well, we have Claire Hanna of the SDLP, a nationalist party. That's her at the bottom. She sent me that photo yesterday, helping at the Belfast Marathon. She has 3 young children, yet really involved in local politics. Both she and Martin O'Muller from Sinn Féin, again I photographed him at a L'Arche fair. They're avid supporters of Park Run, which creates community easily and attracts people from all backgrounds. Martin also attends a Roma church once a month, even though he's not a church goer, but he's reaching out in friendship to people there. When he was Lord Mayor, he invited our Minister Ken to be one of the chaplains, and he had chaplains of all the main faiths. This is our lovely present Lord Mayor, Nuala McAllister of the Alliance Party. And the Alliance Party really try to reach out to everyone in the community, but they just don't do so well at the ballot box because we always vote on the border issue, it seems. Increasingly, people of faith volunteer and work in a secular sphere. The percentage of nuns, those with no church affiliation, is rising. According to one survey, 17% in the north, 12% in the south, and about 46% over here would classify themselves as having no religion. I'm not sure you could say that those are accurate, though, because most people in Northern Ireland would just tick Protestant or Catholic, and maybe they do in other places too. Young people, both in and out of church, generally care deeply about society and want to make a difference, and they're often involved in social justice work. Christians now increasingly go on marriage equality marches and pride. I've been part of a group to encourage our own Presbyterian Church to be kinder to and more welcoming to the LGBT community. Padre Gotuma from before has helped with this, and he organises events in Corrymeela for church leaders. He inspires with his own story of love and hope as a gay person living in Belfast. For Christians, kindness is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It is a gospel imperative to be kind to one another. In the story of the Good Samaritan, it is surprising who is the one who's kind. I'd like to finish with a quote from a wise woman and author, Maya Angelou. Continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness.
I haven't got any slides, but that's quite a nice quote to leave up there, actually. So we'll go with that. So firstly, on behalf of the whole Theos team, I'm really grateful for the invitation from Lee to speak to you tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with Theos, we're a Christian think tank which aims to change the climate of opinion around the role of religion and belief in society. We don't just work on Christian issues, but we are as an organisation Christian. And over the past 12 years, this has led us to conduct research and hold events and discussions on topics as diverse as freedom of speech on university campuses, religious approaches to mental health, and faith-based social innovation. If you're interested in any of our work, and I promise this will only be a very quick plug, but do check out our website and the Friends programme we've got. We send out emails of all the events that we're holding. And most recently, I'm working on a research project building on some of our previous work, looking at church-based social action. And so it's from that perspective that I'd like to speak about kindness tonight. If I only talk about churches and faith groups, it isn't because other organisations are not important or that other organisations are not in any way making a difference in their community. That's very much the case. It's only that the research that we've done has statistics and has stories about churches doing stuff. So that's what I'll draw on, but it's not to isolate any of the rest of it. So when the Big Society was first announced as a flagship policy under the Cameron government a few years back, we at Theos heard from churches and other faith groups for whom the sort of activity that was being encouraged was already their bread and butter. It was already the sort of things that they did. And so they saw Big Society in a way as the kind of institutionalisation of the human kindness that they were already demonstrating in communities up and down the country, whether or not that was motivated by religious faith or otherwise. And the political climate may have changed slightly since then, as have government priorities, but the contribution of faith groups and community groups to their local community remains unchanged. 2 years ago, the organisation New Philanthropy Capital published research claiming that faith-based charities in the UK had a combined income of £16.3 billion every year, not to mention other community charities that are not faith-based. And of this, around 2/3 were Christian charities or charitable organisations affiliated to Christian groups. So against a backdrop of state funding cuts and greater demands on civil society, it's pretty clear that religious groups and churches in particular remain significant in terms of their financial giving and their financial capacity to make a difference. And I think the same is true in terms of time and volunteering and the contribution made by local churches to their local communities. In 2014, at Theos, we conducted some polling together with Comres, which found that just over 10 million adults in England had used church-based services in the previous year. And that doesn't mean service in the traditional religious sense of a church service on a Sunday. We use that to define services to the community based in a church, so things like food banks and stuff. 10 million adults in a year. And the Cinnamon Network Faith Audit also estimated that the time given by churches and faith groups, just the time, was worth over £3 billion a year to the UK economy, in addition to any financial giving that we mentioned earlier. These statistics are repeated again and again in other studies. Last year's Church Urban Fund Church in Action report concluded that Anglican churches provide services which address, on average, per church, 7 different social issues, from poverty through to loneliness to food poverty. And I could go on all night with different statistics illustrating the scale of faith-based social action in the country, but the picture is pretty clear. Churches and other faith groups continue to make a real difference in their communities. It is, of course, a lot easier to quantify social action than it is to put a number on something as abstract as the title for tonight, kindness in the community. But perhaps that's best not told just through neat statistics or numbers, but rather the stories of countless small everyday actions of kindness which do add up to world-changing activity. If the social footprint of the church, and indeed of faith groups more generally, is notable, it's only because it's made up of hundreds and hundreds of local churches, local mosques, local synagogues, each making their own impact in their own community. It's not just the scale of social action which makes it impressive, but also its breadth. There are groups of every religion and every denomination doing everything from food banks, community events, debt counselling, relationship support, youth groups, support for refugees, asylum seekers and people with addictions. And that's in no way an exhaustive list of everything we know that faith groups are doing across the country. The range of structures and models they use is also pretty enormous. There's social enterprises, registered charities, chaplaincies, networks of local churches, churches working in partnership with local governments, and informal groups of 3 or 4 volunteers in some places. And the list goes on. Some of the stuff I could tell you about is incredibly innovative. For example, Clean for Good, which is an ethical cleaning company set up and backed by a London church last year. It's a cleaning company which provides contract cleaners to the big office blocks in the City of London, but pays them a living wage and ensures good working conditions. Or Home for Good, which is a charity which supports Christians to become foster carers and adoptive parents. And that grew out of a group of Christians who went to their local council and asked what the biggest difference they could make in that area was, expecting an answer which would be something like litter picking or maybe a few more tins to the food bank, but were told that the biggest challenge that particular council had that year was finding enough foster parents. And so the church went away and found families in their churches for all the children that needed foster carers in the area. As the character of God tells Evan Baxter, that well-known modern-day prophet played by Steve Carell in the film Evan Almighty, the way to change the world is by doing one act of random kindness at a time. And the way to transform a community might be the same. One act of kindness at a time, whether that's one packet of rice donated to the food bank or one foster home offered to a child. And one of the greatest privileges of my job as a researcher for Theos is to travel around the country and hear what churches and Christians and other faith groups are doing in their local communities. Sometimes it is in terms which I can count easily, which we can put into the bigger picture, but that's not always the case. And so to the topic for tonight, kindness in the community. We might think about the word kind as an adjective, meaning generous, compassionate, that sort of thing. We use it quite a lot. We use it even to talk about things like washing powder, which is kind to your skin. And depending on who you talk to, it's maybe not that much further up the scale of words from nice in terms of soft words that maybe don't really mean a lot. We use them a lot. We use them quite easily. We describe stuff as nice or things as kind. And I don't know about you, but when I was at school, if you used those sort of words and stuff, the teacher would say, go away and find a better one in the thesaurus, because you can't just describe everything as nice. And kind, I think, depending again on who you talk to, might fit into that category in terms of words that we use. But kind is also a noun, a group of people and things having similar characteristics or having something in common. We talk about mankind or humankind. In a former life, I was a languages undergraduate, so if you forgive me for a minute if I get a little bit nerdy about the words and the language. The etymology then of both the noun and the adjective form of kind is linked to the word kin. It's the same kind of word root, and suggesting a sense of family, community, or at the very least relationship involved in kindness. And I think there is something relational about kindness, and this is something that churches and faith groups know only too well. So kindness is, I think, firstly about relationship. In last year's Church in Action survey, which I mentioned before, 76% of Anglican clergy identified loneliness as a significant or major problem in their local communities. And that was a 12% increase on the year before, which is quite a big jump in the number of people in their local community recognising that loneliness is something they recognise as a problem. The work of the Joe Cox Commission and the introduction of a government minister for loneliness in the last year has shown as well the extent of the social problem. And it's a social problem which cuts across socio-economic divides. It isn't limited to particular communities the way that we might understand material deprivation to be. And the Cuff research showed this, showing that while unemployment, debt and food poverty can be seen to be concentrated in the most deprived Church of England parishes, as you might expect, loneliness is prevalent across the country in communities of all shapes and sizes and at all levels of the index of multiple deprivation. So relationships of service and generosity across divides such as generation, ethnicity, and as we've heard already, politics, are central to what the church can be at its best. We hear a lot at the moment about what a divided world we're living in, and this is often echoed at a local level. We hear about how our communities, and not just our country, are quite divided, whether by politics or different issues. But in 2015, the Social Integration Commission found that churches and places of worship can be better than any other social setting at bringing people of different backgrounds together. They ranked ahead of pubs, weddings, parties, other social gatherings, in terms of places where people from different backgrounds are most likely to spend time together. Sports clubs also ranked highly, which is quite interesting. So faith groups are key places of relationship within communities, and they have a presence in every community across the country, despite some of the stories of decline that we often hear. Churches, particularly, are places where, in the words of Psalm 68 from the Old Testament, the lonely are placed in families and can find friendship, not just a checklist of their needs and how those can be met. In relationship, I think that kindness is about listening to people. It's about hearing them as well, and it's about helping them. What I would argue distinguishes kindness, which we're discussing, from social action or charity in a broader sense, is the way in which it implies I'm with you, I'm standing alongside you, and we've got something in common. We have something in common, we are, if you like, two of a kind. Something else which I think is also true about kindness is that it's universal. It probably sounds a little bit trite, but everyone needs kindness, regardless of whether they qualify as in need of support in material terms. It isn't, as we've already heard, just in communities which are classed as the most deprived in the country on the index of multiple deprivation that people need kindness. And that's what's important, I think, when we consider kindness rather than any of the other more programmatic forms of social action or the other ways that we might look at addressing people's needs in the local community. I recently heard the story of a small village in the south of England where many of the residents had grown older, and the members of the congregation had to gradually leave the village to go to older people's homes or retirement homes in a local town. And they quickly realised that they really missed the village and the sense of community that they'd enjoyed there. So members of the congregation and the village who were still living in the village got together and arranged to drive to the town once a month, I think it is, collect all the former residents from their various care homes and drive them back to the village for a cup of tea, to spend some time together and just spend the afternoon reminiscing about their time in the village. And it's a really creative spin, I think, on the lunch clubs and drop-ins for older people, which happen up and down the country. And it stemmed from people looking at their community and the needs of its people and finding ways to be kind. Likewise, the point of kindness isn't always to feed people who wouldn't otherwise get a meal. There's most definitely a time and a place for that, but it might not be the most pressing need in every particular community. In fact, a vicar in a church who runs a community cafe that I spoke to last week went to great lengths to stress that it was a social eating space, not a soup kitchen, when I asked her about it. That isn't to say that soup kitchens aren't valuable or in any way to stigmatise people who benefit from those sort of projects, but rather she was pointing out that in her particular community, what was needed from the church was for it to be generous and kind, if you like, with resources like its space, its kitchen, and its location in the heart of the community. People were quite happy to pay for the food that they were being offered from the church in that place, but they just needed somewhere to do it. And that's what kindness looked like there. It didn't look like giving everything away for free, but it just looked like facilitating other people to come and have a meal together. And lastly, I'd like to argue that kindness isn't restricted. Churches and faith groups are able to respond out of kindness on an ad hoc basis to situations and crises that arrive in their local context, in a way that the welfare state and a lot of statutory organisations aren't always able to be. Kindness can be more formal. It can be organised social action projects that happen week in, week out, but it can also be more informal, so responses to immediate crises. We know, for example, of churches supporting families with Christmas hampers, including warm clothes and presents on top of what might be provided at other times of the year. While school holidays represent particular points of need as well, the benefit system doesn't always account for this, but faith groups across in the community can step in, and they run holiday clubs and lunch clubs to fill the gap for families whose children would usually benefit from free school meals when school's in. Likewise, when there's benefit delays or sanctions and things like that, which have led to crisis point for families, the church and faith groups and community groups have the flexibility to offer hot meals and supplies when doors are closed from the state. And there's a forthcoming Theos report out in a couple of weeks, written by one of my colleagues, Amy Plender, which looks at the faith community and its response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And in that, there are countless examples of kindness shown by local faith groups in the aftermath of the fire. Not in a particularly planned way because they didn't know that it was coming, but they were able to just respond like that out of kindness. One church donated computer equipment to another local church in order to help them carry on supporting the local community after a break-in the aftermath of the fire. Another local faith group ran a holiday club for children affected by the events. But we also heard the story of a church providing a meal for survivors of the fire with silver service, a sit-down served them a meal, going above and beyond the sort of provision that you might expect from any sort of state body, in order to just show human kindness to people. The sort of provision which isn't restricted by qualification or criteria or how much we're able to give, but can be generous, extravagant, you might even say, in serving people in the community. To go back to my earlier discussion of kindness as something relational, we saw a lot in the response to Grenfell, the idea that acts of kindness are ones through which we affirm each other in relationship and solidarity. Faith groups in the aftermath of Grenfell were in and of the community, not just for the community or not just even for their community. It was something that everyone was in together. And one of my favourite songs is by an artist called Foy Vance, and it's called Indiscriminate Act of Kindness. It's about a young woman who's given a bed for the night by a generous stranger, although she can't pay him back. And the song ends with the line, "No one that knows love could leave you out there on such a night. If you can help someone, bear this in mind and consider it an indiscriminate act of kindness." Kindness is demonstrated by many of the examples of social action that we've heard about tonight is indiscriminate, not restricted either by people's eligibility to receive it or by state or organisational capacity to give it. And that line, "no one that knows love," there's something about that line as well which suggests to me that it's through feeling loved and feeling cared for, or feeling supported in a community, that people start to show kindness to others. In our research at Theos, we sometimes reflect that this is also the case with social action in a Christian context. You might expect that if you asked people in a church why they were doing it, they would have a really in-depth theological explanation for why they were doing it, or they'd be able to quote to you the doctrine or the Bible verse which motivates their social action, but it's not always the case. More often we hear people talk about engaging in social action in a church, but they express it in terms of feeling like they belong, feeling like that's what the community that they're part of in that church is doing, and so that's what they want to do. It's a feeling thing as much as it is a thinking thing, I think. And so no one that knows love could leave you out there. The night is the line. And I think that does go back to, it's not about thinking through the rationale or thinking through the motivation, but it is just feeling like this is kindness. You know, you're a human and I'm a human, and this is something that I feel I want to do for you. So in conclusion, the American novelist Henry James once said that there are 3 things in human life which are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. You might argue that this is not a whole lot different from Jesus' words about how the second greatest commandment after loving your God is to love your neighbour. It's no surprise then, I think, that we see churches and Christians responding to their community with kindness, indiscriminately, universally, and most importantly, relationally. On a large scale, making a difference nationally, on a local scale, making a difference in every local community, and on an individual scale, making a difference through the kindness of human relationships.
Evening everyone, my name's Tom Gaskin, and as Lee introduced me, I'm Director of Pop-Up Enterprises, which is a community interest company set up to support young people to learn all about social enterprise and to gain employability in skills and work experience. And we also have a contract, we're working very closely with the Missing Kind charity, which is a non-faith-based charity based in Norwich. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work. It's been a privilege. I'm sure you're already feeling that little bit uplifted after hearing all those fantastic examples of kindness. And that's one of the most powerful things actually about witnessing or experiencing kindness, is immediately you get that uplift. And it's good for your mind, it's good for your body, it's good for your soul. And it's, you know, there's evidence to suggest it does all sorts of great things for your body. It can actually result in you feeling healthier and lowering your blood pressure, all sorts of things. But that immediate uplift that you get is a little bit addictive, and that's what I've got the pleasure of being able to see on a daily basis. I'm going to share some of those examples of kindness that I get to see. So, and first of all, thank you, Lee, and for the university for inviting us here today. So the Missing Kind charity is, for any of you who've grown up in Norwich, you may know of the Pond's Shoe Fitters on Castle Meadow, quite a famous shoe shop. It was the first in the country to x-ray your feet to make sure your shoes fit your feet, until they realised quite how bad it was for your feet. But do come in if you're interested in the history of science, just a little plug. We have a fantastic historic venue there which is open, which has got a fantastic display of all the sort of pond souvenirs and things like that and equipment, and tells the story of that space. And it's now a very different type of space, although still bringing the community together, but for a very different reason, which is to support our charitable mission. We're a small charity with a very big mission, and that is to inspire kindness. And we do that in a number of different ways. Basically, our whole focus is about supporting those dedicated individuals who have the skills, the passion to make a difference to the world. And so we deliver some of the projects ourselves, and it could be partnerships with organisations like Pop-Up Enterprises, or it could be about giving small grant funding to individuals who've got ideas for kindness projects. It could be about helping individuals learn about social enterprise and learning how they can create sustainable organisations that can go on to inspire kindness. So I'm going to take you through a few examples of the difference that we've made. But to begin with, I think the initial invitation to speak at this event sort of introduced the series of events around the introduction of big society in 2010 and the Conservative sort of policy there. At the time, I was working in local government. I was working for Norfolk County Council, and I had the interesting role of leading some of the consultation around the sweeping cuts that came in after, basically after the big society. Over 100 million cuts initially to local public services, and it's hard not to think back a little bit at that time and feel a little bit cynical about it. But what's interesting is that although it was a very big stick, some people have responded really innovatively to those situations that they found themselves in, whether as someone who was very dependent on a particular service that no longer had access to essential support around maybe mental health, or young people looking for counselling or information and advice. Either those individuals themselves have set up social enterprises or other types of organisations, charities, to take on some of this work. And also my colleagues and myself included have set up organisations to help those individuals as well. So I can share a little bit about what I see on a daily basis. And my background is actually in youth and community work, so that's where I started as a youth worker, as a young person actually, at 15, having access to a youth worker who was there when I needed them, and so I got to see the benefit. And as I grew older and sort of reflected on what helped me at that time, it very much was about having someone who was independent of my family for the things that I was going through at that time, and having someone that could keep me really on a straight and narrow path, but be there to offer opportunities. It wasn't just about giving me solutions, it was about helping me find my path, and that's what I try and do through Pop-Up Enterprises, and that's why we're very passionate about working with young people, creating opportunities for them to learn about social enterprise and to participate in social action and random acts of kindness. Is because they learn through those opportunities. We're delighted to have some students from the UEA who come and volunteer at the Missing Kind, and we really couldn't do the type of work that we do without their support, and they get a lot from it as well, which I'll share. So the first story I would probably like to share is how the Missing Kind charity started, and it was set up by a chap called Hugh Callagher, and he was a successful businessman. He set up a glazing company in Diss called Glazing Vision, and he grew it from nothing into a multi-million-pound company. But he reflected on his time and looked back and looked around him really, and looked for the kindness that he recognised that was around him in his communities as he was growing up. And I think he'd got slightly distracted. He was so focused on the profits, so focused on just looking forward and growing his organisation, that it's quite easy to suddenly reach a certain height and forget about some of the basic things that make us human really, and that is about being kind to people, to planet, to animals. So he set up the Missing Kind charity, registered charity, and it's been very fortunate that he's been able to initially financially support it, but we're very much focused around trying to make the charity sustainable. And that's, I think, probably learning from some of the sweeping cuts made to public services and things, is actually, if we're going to make this difference, and it's about being here for the long term and being able to support individuals at whatever stage they are with maybe a kindness project or setting up their social enterprise. We want to be here for the long term to support them. So some of the ways that we do that is through a social enterprise school that we run that's based at the Missing Kind. We've just completed the delivery of our third programme, and the last one was actually funded by Santander, and it's all about helping individuals who may face some form of disadvantage or barrier to helping them move forward. I think, not to single them out, but Paul over there is one of our social enterprise graduates, and it's fantastic, the whole range of different types of activities that are coming through, that people are coming through with ideas to set up social enterprises and inspire kindness in their own sort of unique way. I was going to ask you whether you would, and I'm sure that I know the answer because you're all here tonight at an event around kindness, a discussion. I'm sure you'd put your hands up if I asked you if you described yourself as kind. We all would, and I think, as Hannah said, it is a word that's often overused. I sometimes worry that when we think about kindness, a bit like you would describe, when we think about sort of covers like this. So this is a kindness book. If you look past the cover, it's actually a fantastic book, but you can see they're looking at targeting a particular demographic, and I'd like to challenge that a little bit. I think the issue around masculinity and kindness is an interesting one. We've got some chaps here today, and it's great because actually when I try and describe what I do on a day-to-day basis to my friends, they just look at me like, you've got a very fluffy job. And I probably have, but it's a fantastic job, and it means that I get to see people who make a real difference every day. But yeah, I would like to just tell you a little bit about some of the work. So our vision really, so as I said, our mission is about inspiring kindness, and we do that through those dedicated individuals. And you can approach us as a charity with any idea, and we'll see how we can help to support you if it fits in with our charitable ethos. Our vision is for a compassionate world built on sensitivity, sharing and sufficiency. And whilst we're based in Norwich at the headquarters, we do have activities that happen across the country and some international projects as well that we support. So our largest project that was launched last year is the Kinder Village, which is in Carmarthen in South Wales, and it's an eco village which has been established to really create a sustainable kindness community. So it could be that individuals there work in social care, work in services within the community, supporting individuals, and they have an opportunity to live and work in that community as well. Or it could be that they're interested in running our social enterprise hub there, or supporting sort of sustainable agriculture and things on site there. It's an amazing project, very much in its early stages. I'd definitely encourage you to Google it, because there's a fantastic film of the site, and every time I see it, I just want to go back there because it's a beautiful space. But the plan is for it to bring together all of those people who are passionate about kindness and help them make a real difference, a sustainable difference in the community, whether it's directly within Wales or across the country or internationally. Here in Norwich, we have the Kinder Cafe, which is a cafe that serves healthy, nutritious food. It's mainly vegetarian and vegan, and they have an amazing Pay It Forward scheme, which is sort of linked to Suspended Coffees initiative. And it's where anyone can come in and donate a drink or a meal for anybody else in need, really. It's not just purely for homeless people, although we do get many people who come in and appreciate a warm meal or a drink in the cafe. But it's for anybody, and it's within the sort of right of our volunteers who help us run the cafe and the staff to just make someone's day by giving away a meal or a drink, and it's fantastic. And from the short time that I've been working with the charity since July last year, it's amazing to see how generous people really are. We've had, I think in the last week, we've had a lady who literally emptied her purse and just was apologising because she didn't have enough money to give us, and she gave out £21, and we just seem to attract those types of individuals who just want to make their difference in whatever way they can. And we had during the snow, so when these lectures actually were originally scheduled to take place, when half of Norwich shut down really, we were open as a space for people who just needed to get in the warmth, get a meal and a drink, but also for those who were actually working hard to keep people safe and warm in that weather. So we offered free meals and drinks for those, and we were amazed by the generosity of people. People came in, I think within the space of a week, we had £400 worth of donations, and we were getting to the point where we're having to expand and work with other organisations to get those meals and drinks to the individuals that really need it. I mentioned earlier a little bit about kindness missions. So we are a small charity, very dependent on volunteers. We've got a team of about 20 volunteers in Norwich which help us keep our cafe running. We've also got an ethical shop, which is a way of us, the charity, sort of promoting compassionate consumerism and supporting local social enterprises and charities, and having a conversation really about how we can build a more kinder economy. So people come into the shop and they'll ask about the different types of products that we have there, and they'll either have a sort of description about how they're kind to people, planet or animals. And it's an interesting way. Some people just want to come in and buy a gift, and sometimes people want to learn a bit more about it. But I would encourage you to come and see it if you would like. We sell some lovely T-shirts, 100% carbon neutral, 100% organic cotton. It's a nice way of being able to make someone's day by buying a gift, but also making your money go a little bit further and supporting a good cause. And that's one of the ways that we try to be sustainable, is by having our ethical shop and our cafe. So kindness missions, you can apply for a small grant. It might be that you have a small idea to just do some random acts of kindness in your community, and you just need some funds to help with resources there. So, for example, we funded a project around kindness to bees, Kinder Bee. And it was a project which just got young people working together, creating these little bees that they left with little kindness messages on, and helped make people's day and to inspire them to be that little bit kinder. So throughout the forum in Norwich, I think late last year, if you'd found a little bee, you're very lucky, because there was only about 150 of them. But it was we had people sort of coming in and sharing their stories and sharing them with other individuals and photographing where they were. And sometimes it is just that. You just need to see some kind words and be inspired just to do something a little different, because kindness can often be, actually, as we were saying, we probably would all describe ourselves as kind, but sometimes it's just about going that little bit further, and whether that's just smiling at someone, perhaps. Smiling can just make someone's day. Who, great quotes about, if someone hasn't got a smile, then give them yours. It's that idea that actually you can just make that little difference just with a small gesture. Other ways that we work at the Missing Kind, we support a lot of young people through the National Citizen Service Programme. So last summer we had lots of young people come and give up their time over the summer to do random acts of kindness, to give out kindness messages in the community, to help us do work with the venue so that we can be a bit more sustainable. And they planned sort of fundraising activities for us and things. And it's lovely to see those types of initiatives doing well over the summer. What we try and do then is, from that initial kickstart, we try and then engage them in some of the activities that we do. So some of them volunteer with us and also gain more sort of work experience with us. One of the other ways that the charity tries to work towards sustainability, we're quite fortunate to have several assets. So we have a hotel, kind of hotel in Devon, and all of the profits from that support the charity and local charitable work there. We also have a wedding venue in Cambridge, which again is supported that way. So we think about that not just in the way that it supports profits for the charity, but also in how it inspires kindness. So you can look at the menu, you can look at where we source our products and the services that we get, how we treat our staff. Everything is about that core value of kindness. Some of the other fantastic projects that we've had recently, Kinder Listening, which was an amazing partnership with a lady called Linda Allen, and this was about training volunteers up in deep listening. We all say that we can be great speakers and listeners, but actually sometimes there's a real art to becoming a really good listener. And so we've trained teams of volunteers who now are trained to just, in any location where they feel comfortable, they're equipped with the skills to just be able to listen to individuals and be there for some people. And again, that's sometimes all it needs. We've got, particularly when we talk about men, suicide being one of the biggest killers of men under 50, it's scary, and actually sometimes all we need to do is just learn to talk and to listen. So a lot of the work we do is around mental health. we had an event on Saturday which was called Emerging Proud. It was an international event that was happening all over the world, and it was founded by a lady called Katie Mottram, and that's all about looking at reframing mental illness and seeing it as a bit of a transformational process actually for some. And we had an amazing event where individuals are sharing their experiences, their stories, and just hopefully inspiring people to look at mental health in a slightly different way. We're busy. There's a number of there's millions of different projects that we're working on, and we're often getting involved at different stages of projects. So, for example, like the kindness missions, if someone comes to us with an idea, sometimes they just want the funding, and so they'll go and run it themselves. Sometimes they need a little bit more support from us, so we can help through access to our venues, where people can host events. We can help with promotional marketing and things like that. One of the ones we're working on at the moment is Kinder Schooling, which is a toolkit for embedding kindness across the curriculum. If you'd like to know any more information about that, do have a look at our website. There's a bit of information on there, but we're testing the toolkit at the moment with some schools, but hoping we're getting really positive feedback. And it's about not just teaching kindness as a subject, but actually thinking how you can embed it across the curriculum and within every subject that they're learning. There's different ways, and just applying that sort of thinking around kindness. What else have we got? One of the amazing things, and you'll have seen, so it's not just about the work that charity does. There's lots of amazing examples of things like how Facebook has been used creatively, like all these giving and kindness groups. You can go on there and see them all over the country and internationally, and it's just a way of facilitating community kindness, people helping each other by offering, equipment or house furniture, all sorts of different things when people most need it, or asking just for a little bit of help. And that's what the amazing thing I think about working at the Missing Kind and at the venue is every day we get different people come in with different stories, and some offering help and others looking for it, and we're able to connect people with the right places where they can go for support. We're not specialists in supporting people with mental health or homelessness, so we do work in partnership with a lot of agencies, but what we can do is be that safe, welcoming space where they can come in and just get that initial support. Some of the international projects we do, we've got, because of individuals who have discovered us, we've got a project in Bulgaria where we offer Christmas food parcels for those that may not be able to afford it to celebrate Christmas. We've also sponsored individuals to go to refugee camps to do work around sort of raising awareness of them and fundraising. We even supported an event in partnership with the UEA here, which was all about promoting kindness kindness and the way that it can help to tackle gender equality or promote it. I like a particular quote that I like, which is from L.R. Nost, which is, "It's not our job to toughen our children, toughen up our children to face a cruel and heartless world. It's actually about raising children who will make the world a little less cruel and heartless." And that's what we try to do for all of the work that we do with young people. Is we particularly offer work experience placements to those individuals that may not feel confident in other work environments. And it's important that they are welcomed, that they can see that there is opportunities for them, and quite quickly they gain in confidence and skills. We've got a chap called Aaron who's with us this week, and it's been amazing. He was the school shared with me that he, they really were struggling to find a placement for him and for his confidence and the various sort of issues he'd been through. And within the first day, he was laughing and having a great time with our staff and cooking cakes that were being sold in the cafe. And today, I think I've seen him be the best salesman. And I think it's just in a very short space of time, just being that kind environment it's amazing what you'll see there. And so we try and take out what works there, which is literally sometimes as simple as just being welcoming and smiling, and taking that out to community projects and helping individuals make that a bit more sustainable through things like our social enterprise school. The last thing I'll probably just talk about is a project that's particularly close to my heart, which is some intergenerational work that is a partnership project between the charity and Pop-Up Enterprises and Saffron Housing. We do projects where young people go into shelter schemes, and they sort of teach digital skills with older residents there. But that's the kind of the initial enabler. But actually, what happens is the amazing conversations and the relations that are established through those projects. And it's not nothing new, but it's something that I would love to see more of, and we're working hard to try and scale that up a bit, because it's, you know, there's all sorts of benefits there, that not just for the older people, but actually for the young people as well. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I'd urge you, do come in and see The Missing Kind. We're open Monday to Friday, 10 till 5. You can come see our ethical shop, come and have a cup of tea in our cafe, try some of Aaron's lovely marmalade cake. It's a lovely space, and you'll discover all sorts of new projects that we're working on, that we've been approached by individuals who've just got ideas to make their difference to the world and inspire kindness. So do pop in. All right, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Tom. 3 fascinating talks, just revealing just how much is going on right across the country. And this is now your opportunity really to to put questions, to comment, talk about your own experience, but your opportunity to contribute to a discussion. Who would like to kick us off? Great. Susan.
I was very interested in your comment, all your comments, thank you very much, in your comment about creating a toolkit for school children.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered how you thought of creating a toolkit for politicians. And also just to ask all of you whether you think it's possible to teach kindness and to make political institutions kinder.
Great. Who wants to start off?
I think kindness is more contagious. I think it maybe can be caught more than taught in a way. I mean, my mother was the most kindest person you could imagine. I can't remember her ever saying anything about it, you know. It was just her example. But that, I don't know how that translates to politicians, but it's amazing to hear of these projects. I mean, it would be nice to bring it to your MP and ask for their support, wouldn't it?
Definitely.
And they might catch it.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, sure. I absolutely agree. I think kindness is contagious. I think what we do, I mean, the kind of schooling toolkit is thinking about how you can embed kindness within each of those topics. So, you know, instead of talking about horrible histories, let's talk about some of the positive stories in history as well. And I think it's just about creating that setting. So I don't believe kindness can be taught. It can be fostered. You can create that environment to grow it. And you know, that's down to the values of the school, the teachers, the way that the subject matter that you're teaching. But absolutely, I think politicians could learn a thing or two as well. I think it's really difficult to take any of them seriously when you see them at question time or you know, in any sort of setting like that. And I know, Lee, you're particularly passionate about this topic as well. So I think we hope to get it on their radars. So.
The only thing I'd add to that is that, as Lee mentioned at the start, when I'm not wearing my Theos hat, I'm involved in an organisation called Christians on the Left, and we work as part of Christians in Politics to encourage more Christians into politics more generally. But one of the initiatives we've done over the last year is called Disagree Well. We made a video with the three directors of the Christian organisations in the 3 main parties getting together and having a cup of tea and demonstrating that it's possible to disagree well. Yeah. And that's something we've put out there as not just a faith-based initiative at all, really. I think we'd all do well to learn to disagree well. And I think the way to kind of encourage kindness isn't to pretend that we don't disagree about things. I think that's quite an easy temptation to just kind of gloss over those things, but there are disagreements there. It's good to have those conversations, but we can all do better at learning to do them well, I think.
I mean, it's probably the biggest sort of bugbear, really, when you think about kindness and how you can actually apply that to those people who have control over our lives. I liked this book cover, and I think this book cover is one of the main obstacles to discussing kindness with politicians, that it's seen as being a sign of weakness or touchy-feely, but we all know that power resides with the powerful, and And so not helping and not sort of being compassionate, or keeping that very much to our private lives rather than actually engaging in public. And that needs to be a sea change, and it needs probably people like you and other people to sort of engage in that, as I know you have been doing. But yeah, I've been encouraged personally with talking with, I think I mentioned last week, for those who were here, Charles Clarke, who was the local MP here for a number of years, really did have a bit of a transformation just in terms of how he approached other politicians after he was kicked out of office. Now, whether he would have been able to be as successful in trying to bring politicians right across the political divide together and to try and talk about some big issues, those issues which never normally get dealt with while people are in power. That's going to be the challenge, I think. But, great. Do you have any further questions or comments?
Just a comment, yeah, I'm just thinking that kindness, I do agree, it's seen very often as a kind of soppy thing. Nice, it's got to be nice, I can't disapprove, but it's a very warm, vibrant, muscular thing, kindness, you know what I mean? It's very warm and it's an active thing. And I was thinking when Joe Cox was murdered, I'm ashamed to say I didn't know Joe Cox and I hadn't really heard it. I'd switched off to politics altogether. So disgusting. And on the day she was murdered, I was listening all day. I was on a long journey to the descriptions and the people talking about her. I was just stunned. I had to stop the car. I hadn't heard about this person, and I was stunned because of the murder, but I was actually stunned by the description of the quality of this woman, this politician, and the fighting that she did, and the kind of Joan of Arc quality, really. And then I realised I was so stunned because it was nowhere to be found, and yet there should be more Joan Foxes rather than, I shouldn't have been so shocked, yes, by a murder, but not by, you know what I mean? It's like by the quality of the woman and as a politician, and kindness was her driving force, real force, indomitable. So, yeah, I think it doesn't get a great press.
Have you come across that? You know, obviously you've been dealing with some people who may not have been that kind in previous lives. Jerry Adams
The
and
first,
others.
yeah, the first time I met Terry Adams, I was late and I ended up in the only seat that was left, and it was the one directly opposite him. I felt physically sick. I really did. I mean, initially meeting people like that because of their past history, but then a student of mine, I taught in Belfast Met, and a student of mine, the first in his family to get to university, was shot dead, and I went to meet the family and go to the funeral. And his father was a Sinn Féin councillor, and a few months later I said, you know, can I come back and talk to you politically? Because I said my father was a unionist councillor, and I know you're a Sinn Féin councillor. And I listened to him explaining why he was a socialist. I mean, he had nothing, but he wasn't saying that. He just said that I believe that the people should be treated equally. He was in this tiny house. The gunshots were still through, the gun holes, the shot. The house hadn't been repaired or anything. He wasn't even talking about that, but he was talking about his vision for the community, and that really struck me.
But you also gave the examples of Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and Marshall O'Muller, Claire Hanna. There are a lot of very good politicians as well as some, I was interested about your left of, because we hear about the Christian right so often, and the politics of the Christian right, which seems to be very powerful.
Go for that.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, really, I heard a lot of people saying when Jo Cox passed away that they wish they'd heard about her sooner. And I think I consider it quite a privilege, really, to be involved in politics to the extent that I know that she's not the only one that is that good a person. There are plenty of them. There are, I would say, more politicians that are in it for the right reason than for the wrong reason, but you often hear about the bad stories. And I think that starts with making it a little bit more personal. I think that if we saw politics as a group of people rather than a thing which is kind of an enemy, that might be a place to start. Because no one until you get to know them is a good person really. It's only when you kind of, you know their story and you hear these things and the qualities that people would describe them as. And that's not something we generally hear about from our politicians. I think going back to what you said about, you know, you put that cover up and suddenly it's kind of the shutters come down and this is professional and this is powerful and this is not the place to show all of those nice qualities. That's completely not the case, but I haven't got any bright ideas on how we start that, but I think it starts with seeing politics as a group of human beings, as a group of people, and politicians are human beings before they're politicians. So.
I think one of the things that I felt made a difference was I Daniel Blake, you know, the film. I don't know how far afield it really went, but again I was very struck by that because it was his kindness and it was a relentlessly painful movie. There wasn't a single moment it felt like hardly, but it was his kindness that undid that young woman. You know, you could see the effect of kindness that's offered in the way that he did it. He was needy too, and it just highlighted our society really and what is happening out there, you know, and the need for the kind of things you're doing to be offered. It certainly makes me feel inspired to want to go and do some of it. So welcome into the kind of cafe.
That would be great. I think,
Yeah.
no, please do. I think we definitely need to show a spotlight more on this. It's something that's it's never going to be easily done. I remember when I was working with young people 10 years ago or longer, and there were all these issues around negative perceptions of young people, and in the media it's always hoodies and all this sort of stuff. And so there's lots of projects, lots of work that's gone on to try and shine a spotlight on all the amazing work that young people do, and projects like NCS and social action projects and volunteering, all of that. For some reason we're still, I don't know, drawn to these negative stories, but we need to get that good positive news out there. So more events like this, more opportunities to showcase the amazing things that go on in the community. And sometimes, I mean, as I say, every day I'm blown away by the stories of individuals who come in and share their experiences, some that are in horrendous conditions, but will still give what they can. And we need to find a way to highlight that really, because there's a lot that's going on that's just not seen, is there, in society really, and we've got some real serious problems that we need addressing. And I guess, you know, going back to big society, that whole thing actually that maybe it's not looking to government to solve them all, that we've got loads of amazing initiatives happening in community grassroots that are bringing individuals together to try and solve some of this, but they're going to still need a bit of support. And that was always my issue with big society, was that fine in principle, but actually you need to still build capacity, you still need to offer support financially, whatever it is, venues. We regularly get individuals who come to us who have had their venue closed down through cuts, and they could come and we could fill the venue really with all of those individuals. So that's not really inspiring the type of vision, I guess, that was hoped for with big society. So I'd like to see a bit more support, more politicians coming out and engaging, seeing these types of situations and thinking more wisely where we can spend money.
So how effective in terms of promoting positive social change could the kindness movement become if it were to become a viable political option for the electorate? That's the question.
I think it starts with that, with raising awareness, I think, about all these activities and highlighting it. If we're not starting there, and then it's not going to go anywhere, is it? I think.
But if it was to become a potential political entity, people would vote.
I don't know if it needs to be that though. It's not about it being a separate entity, or it's about embedding that way of what.
The question is the potential. How effective as a movement for social change could it become?
I think it could be.
Was a viable electoral issue.
I wouldn't want to guess what percentage of the electorate would vote for it, but I think one of the problems with that would it would let all the other parties off the hook. Kindness isn't something that is one box on the ballot paper, and no one else has to bother with that. So I think we need something more broader than the kindness strand of our politics. I think everyone needs to be kinder.
Yeah.
know, it's not an alternative to mainstream politics. It's something that mainstream politics needs to understand better.
Could it become one? That's why I'm asking the question.
Well, do you think it could become one?
Well, I'm asking you.
I'll bring it back to you.
Would you vote for it?
Well, why wouldn't you?
Uh,
Potentially, if it's effective in terms of promoting positive social change, which I've seen it to be. And there's a lot of things that need changing and just aren't changing. And I think an awful lot of the electorate are completely frustrated with the political system and the way it completely ignores, you know, the majority, the democratic wishes of the electorate in this country. Is it just a case of lobbying existing politicians and parties to enact more kindness policies? Or would it be more effective to promote social change by actually saying, right, don't vote for them?
I think it's... Sorry.
Partly to respond to that, I also asked a question. I don't think politicians, if they belong to one of the major parties, set out deliberately to be unkind.
No.
Politics is a battle for ideas, and you have to campaign and put your point over. But there's a point you made about that we should be civilised in disagreeing at the end of the day, because it's part of the process of developing ideas and campaigning for ideas. Politicians are only human, and they're going to be unkind at times, but if you have a kindness party, the implication is that all the other parties are unkind, and I'm sure that's not the case. The question I wanted to ask about, we've talked about kindness from a very British perspective, including, if you include Northern Ireland British, I include that umbrella, but from our own sort of our own point of view. But I wondered if any work had been done or any study had been done to say how the concept of kindness has been developed, or its nature in other areas of the world, other cultures, other circumstances. You can imagine, perhaps in a conflict situation in the Congo, the aspect of kindness might be quite different to what you suggest happens in Norwich, community enterprise and that sort of thing. So have we got anything to learn, possibly, this kind of how it works in other parts of the world and in other cultures? Because we've talked about it mainly from a British perspective.
Would Ubuntu, you know, the idea of people getting together, would that be part of it in the African culture? I don't really know the definition. Does anyone here? You would know, Susan, no?
No, I just know a little bit about it. I've heard a little bit about it. I've also heard of some research being done in indigenous communities in North America and other parts of the world where people have used the sort of wisdom or knowledge of that nation to implement those ideas in different aspects of political life. And in fact, some of those ideas of First Nations, for example, in Canada, have been used to create new ideas on restorative justice procedures in Northern Ireland. So I think there have been some ideas like that which have come from different communities with different histories, which have been played out and adapted and then used in other parts of the world. I mean, I know those ideas have also been used in Canada, in many communities in Canada, and then they've been lifted and taken to places like Northern Ireland to deal with the kind of difficulties you were talking about. Sandra, when you were talking about meeting people who have this.
We certainly at the moment have groups from Rwanda in Northern Ireland talking about how they manage the truth recovery process, or a process of people talking about their trauma. And that's been helpful to us. It isn't strictly kindness, but in a way it's kindness because it's helping us, I suppose.
Well, part of peace and reconciliation. We all need that wherever we live.
Karen,
who's author of History of God and many, many other books, has launched something called the Charter for Compassion about 10 years or so ago. And that's now got organisations have signed up to this sort of Charter for Compassion, which is basically trying to change how we all live our lives. And it's based on the Golden Rule, which is true of all the major faiths, certainly in terms of do unto others as you have and do unto you. And there's now about 200, 300 organisations, something like that, around the world involved in that and sort of looking to actually outwork acts of compassion and indeed kindness within their communities. But it starts with sort of an inner change within each person, sort of reaching out to other people. So she's just brought out a book a couple of years ago called 12 Steps to Compassion. Every book which is going to sell has to have 12 steps or 10 steps or something. But and you know, so I think she's drawing on a lot of things from other. Obviously, this panel, you know, hasn't been brought together to discuss sort of beyond sort of the British context. But you're quite right. You know, we're probably beginners actually in this journey compared to many other cultures. And so there's definitely much to learn from other situations and experiences.
Of course, the British context is multicultural.
Yes.
So you need to understand the global perspective, especially when dealing with things like immigration and asylum seekers.
Yes.
But it's interesting, isn't it, how many cultures from further away, you know, the Orient, the Buddhist culture, actually promote individual change in terms of creating greater kindness. You have to change as an individual really to become aware, and rather than campaigning or looking for organisations to actually enact that change for you. And that's an interesting cultural schism really, isn't it, between ourselves and perhaps the British. Perhaps could be a hybrid, you know, there are sort of hybridisations of these ideas perhaps that can take us further and inspire us more.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's probably a good note to sort of to end on. Actually, I mean, we could continue this conversation sort of in the foyer afterwards, but we're sort of at 8 o'clock now. But there's this idea of, you know, being the change you want to see in the world is quite really important. Can I just ask you to take away several things? I mean, it just struck me as the three speakers were speaking. I think, you know, they have been really excellent talks. But Sandra talked about Ken and Jerry's idea of the courage to be kind. You know, I think we can probably all take something from that. Hannah talked about the idea, I'm with you, we have something in common in terms of our approach to other people, reaching out in acts of kindness. And something which resonated, I think, as we heard all of those talks, which Tom sort of brought out, that kindness is uplifting, and, you know, it can uplift our political process, it can uplift our lives, and most importantly, it uplifts the lives of those around us. And if I could ask you to express your appreciation for three really excellent talks. Thank you.